Maintenance. Maintenance is about customer support, minor releases, and other measures to keep our production environment and business in general up and running. Maintenance is an everlasting activity. Now, take a deep breath. We're about to look at the big picture. The big picture of the cycle. Let's use the Smith family for our example. For our episode, we need mother, PM, son, programmer, tester, and release engineer. Father, user. Idea. Mother says to the son, "Your father will be happy if you build him a house as a gift for Father's Day, just like this one in the picture." Product design. Then mother shows son an old photograph of father when he was 5 years old, standing in front of his modest yet warm and loving house in Sunnyvale, California. Coding. After his usual procrastination, son looks at the photo and starts to assemble Lego pieces to build a similar-looking house. Testing and bug fixes. When the house is ready, son kicks it, throws it against the door, inserts and retrieves food into and from inside the house, and does other things that father would probably do. Each problem is fixed as soon as it's discovered. Release. When everything looks fine with the house, son gives it to father. Maintenance. Father immediately tries to open a bottle of beer, and not being able to do this essential task, he asks son to fix the problem, call to the customer support team, which son does by gluing a bottle opener to the roof of the house. Patch release for EFR. Now back to Shareline.com. First, let's recall our knowledge about players, their roles, and the stages in which they participate. Note that the activities for maintenance can be performed at any stage. 1. Let's start at the historic meeting at the bar when the idea of version 1.0 was conceived. 2. After we get an idea, we have to develop a way to implement that idea. Hence, we need a product design for version 1.0. The product design is made by the PM. At the same time, the marketing person generates the ideas for version 2.0. 3. After the product design for version 1.0 is finished, we are at the next stage of the cycle, coding, where the developer writes code for version 1.0. At the same time, the tester writes test cases for version 1.0. The PM creates specs for version 2.0 features. The marketing person generates ideas for version 3.0. 4. After the developer is finished with his code for version 1.0, it's time for the testers to execute the test cases, which have been written for version 1.0 during the coding stage. Now we are at the testing and bug fixes stage of version 1.0. At the same time, the programmer writes code for version 2.0. The PM writes specs for version 3.0. The marketing person generates ideas for version 4.0. When the testing and bug fixes stage is over, we have a major release of version 1.0. Once version 1.0 is pushed to production, the testers jump on the coding stage of the cycle for version 2.0 and start writing test cases for version 2.0. We have just looked at the software development lifecycle for a major release version 1.0 of Shareline.com. After that, it's all an analogy. Now let's look at the big picture. By the way, the big picture is just a model. In real life, especially in the startup environment, everything is not as smooth and structured. For example, during the idea stage of version 2.0, the marketing person can generate ideas for both short-term, version 2.0, and long-term, version 4.0 projects. The main points to understand are the concept of the cycle, who does what during each stage of the cycle, the concept that several cycles can coexist. For example, in March we have activities for 4 cycles where the coming major release is 1.0. Introduction to Agile and Scrum. So far we've looked at the waterfall, but it's not the only model for SDLC. In recent years, Agile methodology has become very popular, especially among software startups. Agile is based on the following principles: quick release cycle, flexibility, constant feedback and process improvement, customer focus, active involvement of the team members. Let's review a widely adopted version of Agile called Scrum. In Scrum, high-level requirements are called user stories. User story should contain enough information for the developer to do an estimate for his work on it. A user story is a simple description of a requirement, and it also mentions why we need to implement it and who is the target user. Examples of the user story. 1. As a ShareLane user, I want to be able to add several books to the shopping cart so I only have to do one checkout. 2. As a tester, I want to see a build schedule of ShareLane so I can plan my testing. User stories are collected into the product backlog. Product backlog includes all user stories that we want to implement at some point, and also bugs, features, tasks, whatever we want to work on. User stories are collected and managed by the product owner. The product owner also prioritizes them and makes sure that others, for example, developers and testers, understand the requirements. Ideas for user stories come from different sources: customer feedback, team members, business department, etc. The same sources as in waterfall. The release cycle is called a sprint. Sprints are short and usually take 2 weeks. At the beginning of the sprint, team members get together for a sprint planning meeting. During the meeting, we decide which stories we are going to implement. They go into the sprint backlog. How we are going to do it. Who does what. After user stories are selected and assigned, we start working on them. Developers write code and testers write test cases. When code is ready for testing, we do sanity testing, then new feature testing, then regression testing, then certification testing, just like in the waterfall model. Every day during our sprint, we get together for daily Scrum. This is a special event where all team members who participate in this sprint stand in the circle, and each of them reports their progress since the last daily Scrum, their plans for today, any obstacle that prevents them from doing their work. At the end of the sprint, we get together for a sprint review. During the meeting, we discuss which stories were done and demonstrate how they work. We often have managers and people from the business department participating at sprint reviews. After sprint review, we, mostly engineers, get together for the retrospective meeting and review what was done right and wrong during that sprint and what we have learned as a team. The retrospective meeting, just like the postmortem, is used to improve our software development process. The whole Scrum process is managed by the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master also educates team members about Scrum and helps to remove any obstacles that they encounter. It's up to the software organization to decide what SDLC model to adopt because there are pros and cons with every approach. Scrum is often preferred because each team member is deeply involved in the process. It's clear who does what. We quickly implement and release new features. We constantly improve our software development process. Lesson recap. 1. Maintenance is about customer support, minor releases, and other measures to keep our production environment and business in general up and running. 2. Maintenance is ongoing activity. 3. The big picture of the SDLC is just a model. In real life, everything is not so smooth and structured. 4. Several cycles can coexist at the same software company. 5. Scrum is agile methodology based on the principles of quick release cycle, flexibility, constant feedback and process improvement, customer focus, active involvement of the team members. 6. A user story is a simple description of a requirement which also mentions why we need to implement it and who the target user is. 7. The product backlog includes all of the user stories that we want to implement at some point and also bugs, features, tasks, whatever we want to work on. 8. User stories are collected and managed by the product owner. 9. The release cycle within Scrum methodology is called a sprint. 10. At the beginning of the sprint, team members get together at the sprint planning meeting where we select user stories to implement during the coming sprint and decide how we are going to do it and who is going to do it. 11. Every day during our sprint, we get together for a daily Scrum where each team member shares their status, plans, and what, if anything, prevents them from doing their work. 12. At the end of the sprint, we get together for a sprint review meeting where we discuss which stories were done and demonstrate how they work. 13. During the retrospective meeting, we review our sprint and decide how we can improve software development process. 14. The Scrum is managed by the Scrum Master.